Guess what we call it? We call it a triplet. That's right, a triplet. Sometimes you'll hear it called a sabao, which is foreign
I won't say that.
medical terminology that just means three as well. So you might hear it called a sabo, or you might hear it called triplet of PVCs. Okay? If we get into 4, we do often call it a quadruplet. But as soon as you get into 4 and 5 PVCs in a row, we shift, and instead of calling them PVCs, we call it a run of VTAC. Does that make sense?
So you could have a sinus rhythm
As
and
long
a
as
rhythm
it's
of
faster.
VTAC.
So you can have a normal sinus rhythm that's pumping along, and then somewhere in the mix, they get a run of VTAC that goes back to a sinus rhythm again.
Do we say how long that run lasted?
Not usually. You mean like it lasted
4
for a
beats?
minute or? No, because when you,
5 beats.
so if we say there's a run of VTAC, it means that it came and went away. And so it means that it's been a short run, 5, 6, 7 beats, and then it's done. Otherwise, we say we had a normal sinus rhythm that converted to VTAC.
But how, do we
And then we
often see
shock 'em
that
and it goes
when
back
we see
to-
a sinus rhythm that have a run of VTAC, maybe comes back to sinus rhythm, then we have a run of VTAC, and then it just converts into VTAC.
Sometimes. Yeah. Make sense? So PVC, if we have multiple PVCs, if we have more than one PVC, we know that they're unifocal, or if they are multifocal. And then we note how many of them happen in a row.
Couple of
So we could have frequent unifocal PVCs would tell us that there's PVCs that happen often, but not in any regular rhythm.
They're just by themselves.
Yep, or we could have frequent multifocal PVCs, or we could have a couplet of PVCs. We could have a couplet of unifocal PVCs or a couplet of multifocal PVCs.
Would we need to put in a couplet of unifocal or multifocal?
Yep.
Not
Or we could
just
have a triplet of them, or we could have a quadruplet of them, or we could have a run of VTAC. That make sense? If you say a run of VTAC, it implies that they are unifocal.
Or even a couple of the PVCs you supply.
We typically would assume that they are unifocal unless stated otherwise. Make sense? If we see multifocal PVCs in a row, where we're trying to say a run of VTAC, then we'd have to move to calling it polymorphic ventricular tachycardia.
Say that again.
If we were to see a run of VTAC where it was multifocal PVCs, we would call it a run of polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, which we're about to talk about that.
Because
particular one,
it converts back.
because they're polymorphic, and because it went back, because we call it a run. Otherwise, we'd say normal sinus rhythm that has converted to.
So would torsades be a polyfocal?
Torsades is a type of polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, that's correct.
Polymorphic.
Multi-shaped VTAC. We okay?
Yep.
Pretty good? Questions?
If we have a junctional rhythm, but we do not have a P wave, I'm just thinking about some of the things we're looking at, we don't have a PR anymore, so we're just writing NA or
Correct.
active.
Indiscernible, because you have indiscernible P waves.
Well, the P wave would be absent of the PR interval,
You can't have a PR interval if you don't have a P wave.
but in terms of, how would we label it, it's just absent.
Indiscernible. You cannot discern it because you don't have a P wave, and the P wave is part of it. Does that make sense? Good? Questions on this? Okay, so if I have a VTAC, but instead of having one focal point, I have many different focal points where this area fires, and then this area fires, and then this area fires, and then this area, and then this area. So this controlled the heart for one complex, then this one controlled the heart for one complex, then this one controlled the heart for one complex, and it continues on around the way, right? Many different places are controlling that, and it usually gets into kind of a systematic way of doing that. then from my camera angle, from one camera angle, the QRS complex is taking a different pathway to that camera every single time. Does that make sense? So if from a particular pathway, the first camera angle was like this, the second camera angle was just a little bit off from that, but not too great, but a little bit off. So I had something very similar, but it looked a little bit different. Okay? And then it moved. And so it was a little bit different, but still similar. And then it kept doing that. At some point in time, it became almost entirely biphasic, which means it was small. And then it started moving away from that. Does that make sense? Where at one point, I had my R wave and T wave, and it kept going until I was biphasic, and then I had my R wave and T wave. So it was opposite from what it was before. And it makes it look somewhat like a rotisserie. Does that make sense? That is what we call polymorphic, multiple shaped, polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. That make sense? We haven't discussed the QT interval yet, and I'm not going to do that just yet, meaning I don't want you to have to start thinking about that measurement, because that measurement is not as clean as the PR interval or some of the other measurements that we've been doing. It requires a corrected calculation. But if my QT interval was, if I had a long QT interval, then that polymorphic VTAC actually has a specific name. And that is torsade.
The point is. He's way to say that.
Torsade de pont is, it literally means, it's a French term, it literally means turning around the point, which is exactly what that's doing.
Could you say it with more like accent and?
No,
He's not gonna give us that test.
but you can practice that in the mirror if you want.
I do.
I bet.
I practice Amanda's name
While you're
too.
lunging with your
Yes.
left foot.
Just
I actually saw you do that. I didn't know what you was like, it's supposed to be the new thing we're doing today.
So,
Same flip over and over.
if I see this, I have a polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. The only way that I can actually tell if it's torsades, which is a very specific and the most common of the polymorphic ventricular tachycardias, but the only way I can tell that is if I can measure the QT interval. The only way I can measure the QT interval is if I can measure what's happening before it entered into torsades. I have to be able to see my rhythm before that in order to get my QT interval, measure what's happening in my QT interval here to know that that is actually torsades and not polymorphic ventricular tachycardia.
So you're just assuming and pushing magnesium?
So if we do that and we push magnesium, yeah, we would often, if this is all we see, if my patient's in this, we'll often try the magnesium, assuming that it's torsades. Just realize that it might not work. If it's not really torsades, which is a magnesium deficiency, then giving the magnesium actually wouldn't have helped that particular rhythm. But if it was torsades, it would have helped that rhythm.
Would it hurt?
It wouldn't necessarily hurt them, but it does limit what you can do with any other antiarrhythmics after that, because magnesium disrupts the ability for other antiarrhythmics like amiodarone to be able to function. So you make a decision, you make a guess, and you do it. If you don't see the rhythm before, to know that you can check that QT interval, then you make a decision, and if you went that route and it didn't help, you just are done with your antiarrhythmics at that point. Which is not the end of the world, because antiarrhythmics are just considerations anyway.
If we have torsades and give mag and then it goes back to VTAC, do we then push our antiarrhythmic?
Magnesium would be your antiarrhythmic.
Okay, that was some confusion on one of the mega codes we ran. Or that was presented as a mega code where we had torsades, we pushed our mag, and then it went back to
A VTAC after that.
VTAC after that, and we pushed AMI.
You would not expect the amiodarone to be very effective at that point.
according to ACLS, would we,
You wouldn't be wrong.
you wouldn't be wrong? Okay.
You just would not expect it to be all that effective because those drugs have interactions with each other. You had a question? I saw your hand, so I know you have it.
Come on, Annalise.
Where's your T wave?
On here, I did not try to draw it correctly, but in the entire rhythm, you'll have the T wave flop, and you'll have the QRS complex flop. So in polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, you'll have a positive R wave with an inverted T wave that eventually will become biphasic because you can't really see. And over here, it'll be the opposite of over there. So my QRS complex is actually negative, and my T wave is inverted to the positive. And then it'll come back down again, and then it'll flop again, where my R wave here and my T wave is at the bottom.
And you can't distinguish that until you see the prior rhythm.
You can't distinguish between whether it's a run-of-the-mill polymorphic VTAC or a torsades unless you see the rhythm before.
And we only really care that it's torsades because that one we can actively correct with a different medication.
Correct. So if it's polymorphic ventricular tachycardia and we're pretty sure that it's not torsades, we would never go down the magnesium route.
Right.
But if it is, we would want to go down the magnesium route.
And what conversion to a polymorphic VTAC would we see that would make us think that it's not torsades?
We would have to see the QT interval beforehand. We'd have to measure,
It's a matter of timing.
it is, we'd have to be able to measure that QT interval before we got into the polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, which means we would have to have serial EKGs on them where we saw them in some sort of a normal QRS complex first.
Would
Can you
our,
put them into torsades?
What'd you say?
There's nothing that you typically can do that'll pop them in the torsades. It's specifically a magnesium deficiency. So unless you can siphon their magnesium,
Hey man,
the
that's
magnesium in their
yellow.
blood out, you won't do that. Do you have a question, Jim?
I was saying, what would that rhythm look like, the QT interval, but you said you're not gonna go with that?
I'm not yet, because I don't want you worrying about measuring QT intervals just yet. The QT interval, what is the QT interval? Do you remember? Where it starts and ends?
Start of the Q to start of the T.
Beginning of the QRS complex to
Start of the T.
the end of the T.
This is an interval.
And we know automatically, it's an interval, it's at least one wave and at least one segment, but this one goes to the end of the T. What do we know about the distance between the QRS complex and the T wave? What do we know about that distance? In normal physiology, what do we know about the distance between the QRS complex and the T wave?
Stable, the same.
In normal physiology, what do we know about that distance?
That the T wave is only in the QRS complex.
Are you talking about the distance between? Or
I am, that's what I said.
There is no,
I'll ask it again.
it's,
What do we know about the distance between the QRS complex and the T wave in normal physiology?
there is
Sure there is, it's called the ST segment.
no, it's very short.
What do we know about that distance in normal physiology?
Are you talking about time?
Well, I have to because we're talking about the x-axis. What do we know about, what do we know about it?
Isn't it like 0.36 to 0.41
Stable.
I'll give you a hint. We're about to have a 3-hour talk on first degree heart block again because the transition is the same. The concept is the same. What do we know? Remember the discussion we had on first degree heart block a little while ago? It was,
Married.
we had it related to a rhythm that was, not everybody had it. Half of you in here had it. It was related to a bradycardic rhythm and a first degree heart block. Remember that discussion?
Oh, yeah.
We took a long time discussing it.
Increases.
What do we know about the QRS complex and the T wave and the distance between them?
It's stable unless it slows down.
there's a relationship between the rate, The-
Related to what?
the rate and the distance between the, that's what it is. How fast we're going, our rate is going, is gonna be how fast or slow that repolarizes.
Because of what?
Because of the engagement of the sympathetic system.
And what will the sympathetic system do to
Will
that timing?
speed up repolarization, so it's gonna be a shorter QRS.
And the parasympathetic system is going to do what?
Lengthen the ST segment.
No.
No, it's
Decrease
not
heart rate.
going to, it's,
It's not gonna
Increase
It's-
PR interval.
yeah, it would increase PR interval.
Yeah, we don't care about PR interval right now, though. We don't
So
really care
the-
about PR.
So the parasympathetic wouldn't affect it?
If we have parasympathetic involvement, what would happen to that timing compared to sympathetic involvement?
It would be normal.
Okay, so what would the distance be? What would the timing be?
It would be standardized.
Okay? In comparison to sympathetic activity, it would be?
Shorter, longer,
And what would the sympathetic activity be in comparison to?
shorter.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So therefore, our QT interval is never a set interval. Like the PR interval is always a range, and it's a very small range, 0.12 to 0.20. We can't have a normal range to our QT interval because it completely depends on the rate of the heart all at once and how much sympathetic involvement just happens to be there. So for the QT interval calculation, we have to have a calculation to find out what is normal for the QT interval at a given heart rate for that patient, which is why I'm not talking about it right now. Because it's a calculation we have to make based on how fast the heart rate is related to how much sympathetic activity they have at a given moment in time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to calculate what the normal QT interval would be and then find out if it's longer than normal to determine torsades.
Good luck doing that in the field. Oh,
You can do it, it doesn't take long. But you have to be able to see an EKG beforehand,
yeah.
Right.
right?
Would amiodarone help with polymorphic
Yes.
BTAC?
Correct, because this is not because of magnesium deficiency, so amiodarone being a
Anti-arrhythmic?
sodium, calcium, and channel blocking medication can have an effect on that that's positive. Good?
Cool.
Questions? Okay,
Yeah. What if we gave AMI first and then MAG?
what
Would
about,
they, would they still
you
interact?
still have an interaction there.
But the AMI would do its effect and not work, and then you do the MAG.
You don't have, drugs don't work kind of like that, right? Because the drug's in your body and it makes adjustments to the liver for how it's gonna metabolize the other drug. So you have issues with it when you mix drugs.
So if we give AMI for
And you don't wanna start
torsades,
chasing drugs.
if we give
So
AMI,
wouldn't it be better if you were a really good, solid thinking EMT, right? A good, solid paramedic that really knows your stuff and you figured it out from the beginning and then you chose the right drug?
if
But you
we,
can't
if we
always.
gave AMI to torsades, it wouldn't fix it because it's a magnesium deficiency,
You
and then
wouldn't
we
have-
would wipe out our
But
ability
you wouldn't be
to,
able to use other drugs to, yeah.
To
You
fix
have
it.
drug interactions that you have to
So you suffer.
keep track of,
So-
right?
How?
So I would promote you be a really good medic that determines what the problem is and then choose the right intervention.
Absolutely.
Then
but if
to-
we aren't there
then
to get
choose
the
the shotgun
QT.
approach
yeah.
that a lot of medics use and have been using for many, many years. Right? I'm just saying.
No, you're right.
Okay. I should, we're done. Okay. In lab today, when we start doing lab, it'll be similar to what we did on Tuesday for those of you that went to that first lab, that were at the first lab. So we'll have an EKG portion of it, along with some other stuff. Any of the rest of you that just want to be here for that, you are welcome to stay if you want extra practice on the EKG stuff. You're welcome to do that. In addition to that, I've got a meeting tomorrow, I think at 11 o'clock. So from basically 11 to noonish, I'm in the meeting here. But before and after that, I will be available, specifically if you're interested in some EKG practice and help. There's open lab too. I'm not gonna really do much assisting at the open lab. I'd rather help anybody that wants some help in just EKG stuff.
Will
As
there
we're
be an
getting-
instructor here?
For,
Open line?
who's here for
Sue.
open lab? Sue? Some instructor will be here. And I'll be here to open it up. I just will be here to help anybody that wants some added assistance on EKG or get ahead and do a lot of analysis, that kind of stuff. So, if any of you.
How,
from-
sorry, how long after are you here for?
How long?